All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to talk about something that's honestly the bedrock of our entire financial system, audit regulation. These are the rules of the road that govern every single thing an auditor does, and they are absolutely critical.
And look, that's not being dramatic. The stakes here are just massive. When a huge company goes under, the ripple effects are felt by absolutely everyone, from individual retirement accounts to the entire global market. This is exactly why the auditor, that independent guardian of the numbers, is so important.
And this quote, it really hits the nail on the head. Because over the past couple of decades, we saw a string of massive corporate collapses. Think about the huge ones, like Enron back at the turn of the century. These scandals just completely shattered public trust. It became crystal clear that the whole system needed a much stronger framework.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll dig into that crisis of trust and see why these regulations became so vital. Then we'll look at the two main pillars that hold up the entire framework. After that, we'll follow the life cycle of an auditor, explore the dance between global standards and local laws, and finally, see who's guarding the gates of the profession.
Right, so these massive failures weren't just one-offs. They were symptoms of a much bigger problem, exposing some serious systemic weaknesses. This created this urgent need for stronger, more powerful rules to make sure history didn't keep repeating itself.
So, to fix this, to rebuild that trust, regulators had to step in with some big changes. The idea was, 1, to get everyone on the same page by harmonizing procedures across the globe. 2, to put audit quality itself under the microscope. And 3, to double down on ethics, making sure auditors were truly independent and acting with integrity.
So what does this regulation actually look like? Well, it's not just some giant single rulebook. It's actually a really smart framework that's built on two foundational pillars. They work together to create this complete system of oversight.
Okay, so this image here really lays it out for us. On one side, you have the legal requirements. Think of this as the law of the land, like the UK's Companies Act. You can't argue with them. They're non-negotiable. And on the other side, you have professional standards. These are the rules that the accounting profession sets for itself to make sure everyone is behaving properly. You absolutely need both for the system to have any real teeth.
Okay, so we've got the big picture, but how does this translate to the real world for the actual auditor? Well, it maps out their entire career. Who can even be an auditor in the first place, how they get hired, and exactly what they're supposed to do.
So, can just anyone wake up one day and decide to be an auditor? Absolutely not, and for good reason. The barriers to entry are deliberately high to protect all of us, the public.
And this is where the rules get really specific. First, you've got to have the credentials. You need to be a member of a professional group, a recognized supervisory body like ACCA, or get a direct sign-off from the government. But what you can't be is just as important. You can't be an employee of the company you're auditing. I mean, it makes sense, right? You can't be marking your own homework. And the same goes for having close personal or business ties. That independence is everything.
All right, so you've got this pool of qualified, independent people ready to go. Who actually gets to pick them? Who does the hiring? The answer tells you a whole lot about how companies are supposed to be run.
So, if you look at this chart, the biggest bar by far is the shareholders, the company's owners. And that makes perfect sense. The auditors are basically hired by the owners to keep an eye on the people running the company, but there are exceptions. The directors can step in to appoint the very first auditor, or if one suddenly leaves. And in really rare situations, if nobody else does it, the state can appoint one to make sure an audit actually happens.
Now this is super important. Getting rid of an auditor can't just be a snap decision. Think about it. If it were easy, a company could just fire any auditor who started asking too many tough questions or getting a little too close to the truth. So, to stop that from happening, there's a formal process.
And that process is full of checks and balances. The decision ultimately goes to the shareholders for a vote. Everyone, including the auditor, gets plenty of notice. And here's the kicker. The auditor gets to defend themselves. They have the right to show up at that meeting, speak their mind, and explain their side of the story. It's a huge protection to make sure they're not silenced for doing their job right.
This really boils it down to two sides of the same coin. What auditors get versus what they have to do. Their rights, getting access to all the books, all the info, those are the tools of the trade. They need them to do their work. But their duty, their one core job, is to give their honest, independent opinion on whether the company's financial statements are, and I quote, true and fair. That's the whole ballgame. Okay, so let's zoom out a bit, because in today's world, companies are global, and so auditing has to be too. So how do the rules in, say, Germany connect with the standards used in Japan or Brazil? This chart kind of shows you the family tree of global regulation. Right at the top, you've got this body called IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants. Think of them as the global headquarters for the profession. And underneath them, you have these other boards that set the standards, including a really important one called the IASB. They're the ones that write the global auditing rulebook.
And that rulebook is what we call the ISAs, or International Standards on Auditing. Basically, this is the global playbook. The whole point is to make sure that an audit in one country is done with the same rigor and quality as an audit anywhere else in the world. It creates a level playing field.
Okay, but this is probably the most important thing to remember about all this. These ISAs, these international standards, they're guidelines. Hugely important ones, but they are not the law. A country's own national laws are the ultimate authority. So if an ISA says one thing, but local law says another, the local law wins. Always, no exceptions.
So we've got all these rules, both local and global. But who's the police? Who makes sure everyone is actually following them and that the quality of the profession stays high?
And that's where the professional bodies, like the ACCA, come in. They're like the guardians of the profession. They're the gatekeepers, right? They set the tough exams, require years of real-world experience, and make sure ethics are front and center. They also make sure auditors keep learning throughout their careers. And if someone messes up, they have the power to step in and take disciplinary action.
And you know, this whole system isn't set in stone. It has to change and adapt. Take the collapse of the construction company, Carillion, in the UK. That was another one of those massive scandals that sent shockwaves everywhere. It led to the conclusion that the old regulator just wasn't cutting it. So they decided to create a new, tougher watchdog called ARGA, with more power to investigate and punish wrongdoing. Which really brings us to the big question, doesn't it? As the world gets more complicated, with new technologies and complex global companies, the job of the auditor keeps changing. The rules we talked about today are the foundation, for sure. But what's next? What new rules and new ways of thinking will be needed to keep that essential public trust alive?